Good evening.
Good evening.
So, talk about Abraham's family today. Talk a bit about the life of Abraham, probably as far as we get. Abraham, I think, is the most important and significant person of all of human history. He changed history more than any other individual up until today. It's about 4,000 years ago he lived, but the things that he discovered, the way in which he came to understand and make sense of the world, is the way that Jews, Christians and Muslims make sense of the world in which we're living today. So his basic insights into the nature of reality, the oneness of God, the relationship, the origin of evil and all these things, these are the basic insights which inform Judaism, Christianity and Islam up until today. And so we think about the world's population today, more than half the population of the world today are either Jews, Christians or Muslims. In other words, they're descendants, spiritual or physical descendants of Abraham. That's why we call Abraham the father of faith, because he's the father of our faith. And so that's why, I think we need to look at his life and his character and what he taught in a little bit of detail, because it's incredibly significant. And sometimes people just skim through it. He was around 4,000 years ago. People sometimes talk about the mistakes he made, but actually he was a horrible person. So we look at Abraham's family, and we see that when we go back, last week we were looking at Noah's family, and we saw that Noah had trying to restore Adam's family, but things didn't work out they're supposed to have done, the way they're supposed to have done, and so we can say that Noah then had two sons, Shem and Ham, who were supposed to make the foundation of substance, but Ham made that mistake. And so from Shem's lineage then, 400 years, biblical years, and 10 generations later came Abraham, who also had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And so you can see here the pattern. So what Abraham and his family are trying to restore is what Noah and his family were trying to restore. What Noah and his family were trying to restore is what Adam and Eve and Adam's family weren't able to do. And so lots of things went wrong in Adam's family, many different things, and each of these things that went wrong, and the way in which they went wrong has to be restored, has to be reversed. And so Noah and his family tried to do that, but they weren't able to do it before, and then this was passed on then to Abraham. So the world of Noah, remember the time of the flood, this is the world of, how would you describe that world in which Noah was living in? Primitive, yeah. But it was what sometimes political philosophers describe as like the state of nature. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century English political philosopher, he said that in the state of nature life is nasty, brutish and short. Because without government and without laws, then somebody goes around murdering somebody, no police to go out and arrest this person and punish them. And so life is really unpleasant. And you have a lot of feuding and all these sorts of things. So that was the reality of the evil in Noah's time, was that kind of state of nature. So we'll have a look at Abraham's world and we'll see it's actually quite different in many ways. So this here is a picture of the Tower of Babel. So where did Abraham come from?
Ur of the Chaldeans.
The Chaldeans, that's right. Anyway, Chaldeans looks like it's something later. It's an anachronism. Okay, he came from and where is or where was
I think Ur is in modern day Iraq.
Modern day Iraq, that's right. The southern part of modern day Iraq. Anyway, in sort of biblical tradition, it was a city, it was the first city in the world, and it was a city which was ruled by somebody called Nimrod. And he was a dictator who had a huge personality cult, and he thought that people should worship him, just like modern day dictators think that they should be on a pedestal and worshipped, and all the glory should be given to them. The sort of archetypal modern day example, of course, is Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and these kind of characters. And Nimrod was in that kind of mould, sort of first person of that stream of satanic history, you could say, personality cults. As in any means, let us revolt and might wonder what he was revolting against. He was revolting against the idea that there was a being that was higher than he was. He revolted against the idea that there was a God who would stand in judgment upon him, because he thought that there was no being higher than himself, that he was the one who made the laws, the one who judged, and the idea that he should be judged and held responsible for his deeds was something which he didn't like. Anyway, so he got together and with the people living around there, he built the Tower of Babel to challenge God. So up until that time, people were living in their own little farms and villages and whatever. And so he, in that sense, up until that time, he wasn't very powerful, but he managed to persuade people to get together and to concentrate into cities. And in cities, often lots of bad things happen. People become very secularized, very cut off from the local natural world. And he got people to build this tower, a sort of planned society. And the text of the Bible is quite interesting in this regard, because it says, it says the whole earth had one language and the same words. And so this is the idea here that at that time, but before this time, actually during the time of the flood, it says that the people spread around the world and there were 70 different languages and 70 different people. But here it says the people had one language and the same words. So it's the idea here that there was an empire and Nimrod was the head of this empire, and one of the ways in which he united his empire was to force everybody to speak the same language. This is the way in which he deprived people of their historical sense of identity, and he expanded his empire so everybody ended up speaking the language of his people, and that was the way in which his empire expanded. And that's quite common, isn't it? I mean, again, you look at historical empires, when people have empires that try to get the people who they enslave and they conquer to speak their language. And in that sense, that people expand. So he was that kind of a person. And through building this great tower then, it was the idea that through this he was creating this kind of planned society and enslaving people. And that's a sort of model of a different kind of evil, a sort of totalitarian kind of society. So the time of Noah, everything was incredibly atomized and individualized, so it's a state of nature, and this kind of evil was a totalitarian kind of evil, where he had a dictator trying to enslave everybody and get everybody to fit into this planned society. So they built this tower to try and attack God. Anyway, Abraham's father, this is where Abraham was born and grew up. His father was Terah, and he was an idol maker. So what's an idol? It's a man-made object worshipped as if it were God. And the prophets and the biblical tradition, one of the key points of the biblical tradition is this rejection of idols. And Judaism and Islam particularly have a complete rejection of idols and idol worship. And you find this in the Bible, that often idols and idol worshippers are mocked. So this is the prophet Isaiah saying, their land is full of idols, they worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. So here you can see the prophet Isaiah, he's mocking the idol worship of the other people living in Canaan. So what do you think about mocking other people's religion and being in the news of this and that?
Like today.
Yeah?
It's going on today.
So that's what he's doing, he's mocking the religion of other people. Do you think that piece of the Bible should be removed then?
Well, what he's stating is quite factual. So
It's factual, but the whole tone of it, and this is just one verse, the whole is from a long passage, in which the whole tone of the language is actually a mocking. They worship, their land is full of idols, they worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. It's the idea of how ridiculous they are to worship things that they've made themselves. Yeah. So this is the sort of traditional understanding is that the creator is the master. The idea that you worship something you created is kind of, how foolish can you possibly be? This kind of sense. Yeah. And so this actually comes back to this whole idea in Islam as well, because if you remember Muhammad, when he went into the Kaaba, he went and smashed all the idols. In the Kaaba at that time, there's 365 idols, one for each day of the year, and so people used to come from all over Arabia and elsewhere to worship the idols in the Kaaba. And so Muhammad, after his encounter with God, realized that there's only one God and idol worship is a sin. And so when he went into Mecca, he smashed all the idols and returned the Kaaba to the worship of the one true invisible God. And so that's why it's very easy and very tempting for people to start worshipping idols, isn't it? Start worshipping human beings, to put them up on a pedestal. Yeah, and hero worship people, it's very common. It's gone on throughout human history. People often worship political figures or kings or this or that person. And in doing so, they often ignored the flaws. And they've also often tried to pretend that person had no flaws. Yes? That sort of thing common? It goes on all the time. And so this is a great danger that you find in religions as well. And so that's the nature of Islam. There's this strong sense of rejection of idol worship. And so there's a temptation then for Muslims to have worship the Prophet Muhammad, just as Christians worship Jesus. And so that's why, that was the origin of this injunction in the Quran that there should be no images of made of the Prophet, to discourage people from starting to worship the Prophet and bow down to images of the Prophet. But the reality of modern day Islam, though, is this incredible veneration for the Prophet, such that they don't like cartoons to be drawn of him, which is the exact opposite of what the purpose of this injunction was about, that they shouldn't over-venerate the Prophet and worship the Prophet, because they should only worship God. And the Quran, it says all the prophets are equal, from Adam to Abel, to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Jesus. The Quran, it says all the prophets are equal, they have equal status. None is higher than the other. But it's always tempting, though, to think that one's own prophet is greater than all the other prophets. And that's a reality. This is kind of a temptation which all religions fall into, to think their leader, their founder, their prophet is greater than all the other ones. Yeah. And to turn that prophet into God, which is what happened in the early days of Christianity, the deification of Jesus and the worship of Jesus. Same kind of temptation, every faith, every religion faces. Anyway, so this was the biblical view of idols. You shouldn't worship man-made things. You shouldn't worship nature. You should only worship the Creator. Only the Creator is worthy of being worshipped, not things that we make ourselves. So in the modern world, you find people do worship things. They might worship their Ferrari car, spend so much time polishing the car, yes? Or people might worship their toys. Well, they might worship this, they might worship that, or the designer labels they wear. Well, they might worship their country, nationalism. They're proud. I'm proud of my country because of all the things that it's done in the past. But were those things you did yourself? You know what I mean? One can love one's country, but to have that kind of pride is nationalism. It's very false and empty and arrogant. You understand? These are the kind of temptations of idol worship one's religion, and all these sorts of things. It's not just worshipping physical things, it's worshipping human institutions like a country, or a religion as a human institution, or a book as a human thing, all these things. Okay, so this is the biblical tradition. It's very much very skeptical, very critical of idol worship. Any questions? That makes sense? So idol worship is a very interesting idea and a very interesting critique of idol worship. It's very important. Relevant today. Okay, so why did God choose Abraham? So Abraham then, from whose lineage did Abraham come?
Well, from Japhet actually.
Okay, no, Shem. Okay,
Yeah,
that's one part, one aspect of the lineage. But then what was his father's job?
Idol maker.
Idol maker. Okay, so it came from a family of idol makers, idol worshippers. So what spiritual lineage is that?
Satan's lineage.
Satan's lineage, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So how could God choose Abraham then, if he came from Satan's lineage? in that sense. How is it possible for Abraham to change his lineage? So when we looked at the story last week, we saw how Satan was able to invade Ham because of the mistake that Ham made, invaded his emotions, his feelings, his thoughts, such that he made this mistake. So Satan claimed him in that sense. So Abraham then is a third son of Terah, an idol maker, but God is able to claim him. Now, can God just intervene and claim him? Is it possible for God just to do that? Who's responsible for changing the lineage?
I think I think Satan is I think it's responsible for the change of lineage, and I suppose from what you know from this point of view now, that since Satan is invaded the top two, Adam and Noah, then he had a condition. The third time he can take somebody from sinner's hand and bring it to God's side, because he owns everything anyway.
Okay, did God bring Abraham to his side, or did Abraham separate from Satan and go to God?
Yes, Abraham was separate from Satan, of course. God had to make conditions on his behalf,
Yeah.
so that he can separate from
Yeah.
Satan's side to
Because
God.
Abraham was the one who had to do it. God couldn't just say, oh, I'm going to take him. But actually Abraham himself had to go through a life-changing experience.
Yes.
So this is what the change of lineage is. Father said, where's the change of blood lineage done? On the individual level, as Abraham's an individual, man has to go beyond the boundary of life and death. The individual has to go through life and death situations for the sake of God and the future dignity of man. So Abraham then, he had to go through a life and death situation such that he changed his identity from I'm the son of an idol worshipper to I'm a son of God. It's a huge change of consciousness, a huge change of sense of self and sense of identity. So, if Abraham then was a son of an idol worshipper, how did Abraham come to a formal relationship with God? And with Noah's time, it says that God called Noah, that God intervened and gave Noah these commands. But it doesn't say that with Abraham. It's actually Abraham who reached out and found God. A very different kind of faith. Yeah? Instead of God reaching out to Noah, calling Noah, Abraham found God. And so Noah then, as we talked about last week, was very responsive. He responded to God's commandments, but he wasn't someone who took the initiative. Yeah? Whereas Abraham was a very different kind of person, a very different kind of faith. He wasn't responding to God, he actually took the initiative. So how then did Abraham discover God? Well, that's the proof to you I'm not making it up. There's a book about it. Anyway, so it tells a story in the Quran and also in the Talmud about the story of how Abraham discovered God. Now apparently when Abraham was a little boy, he was a very annoying little boy. And why aren't little boys sometimes incredibly annoying?
Ask questions.
They ask questions, don't they? What's the main question they ask?
Why?
Why? Why? And are they ever satisfied with the answer they get? You give them an answer, what do they say? Why again? And why again and again?
Oh yes.
Yes? You remember?
Father was exactly the same.
Yeah, okay. And so that's the kind of person Abraham was. He was never satisfied with the answers he was given. And he drove his parents absolutely round the bend. So he always wanted to understand and make sense of the world in which he lived. So he's like a philosopher. Yeah, one day, Abraham thought to himself, where do I come from? He realised I haven't always existed. And so he asked his parents, where do I come from? And they said, you came out of mummy's womb because, we made love and we created you. And so then Abraham started bowing down and worshipping his parents. He said, wow, well, you created me, you're my God, I'm going to worship you. Anyway, this went on for about a week. And then Abraham said, where did you come from, Mum and Dad? Did you make yourselves? And they said, no, of course not. We have parents as well, Grandma and Grandpa. And so he stopped worshipping his parents, and he went next door and started bowing down and worshipping his grandparents. And he said to his grandma, Grandma, you've got so many wrinkles, you look like you've been alive forever. You look so old. Well, very polite. And so he said, have you always been alive? Have you been around forever? They said, no, we also had parents. And Abraham said, tell me, where are they? I want to go and worship them. And so they said, well, they died. They're buried out in a churchyard. Well, not a churchyard in those days. They're in the burial, in the graveyard outside the town. And so Abraham set off and went to the gravestone and started rubbing them off. So he found his great-grandparents and started worshipping his great-grandparents. And he thought, well, there must be some great-great-grandparents there. So he went around the churchyard tracing his family tree, basically, and his lineage, and worshipping all his ancestors. Anyway, one day, somebody died in the town, so the grave diggers came along to dig a new grave. And so Abraham thought, well, that's interesting, I'll go along and watch them digging this grave. And when they were doing that, they disturbed an old grave, and what appeared was some bones. And Abraham was really shocked, and he thought, wow, what happened to that person who's buried there? All that's left is bones, and all the flesh has turned back into dust. And they realized from the earth, we come from the earth. Yeah, and then he started worshipping Mother Earth. Yeah, the dust of the earth. Anyway, then after a while, one day, it was a very cloudy day, and the sun didn't come out for several days. And you know what it's like when it's cold and the sun doesn't come out, and you feel like, death warmed up. And then one day, a few days later, the sun did come out, and he felt all alive. And he realized, actually, if there wasn't for the sun, there'd be no life. And he started worshipping the sun. Then eventually he realized the sun goes down, and he realized everything in this world changes. But behind all this, everything that's changing, there must be an unchanging reality, a first cause. I have parents and grandparents, and tracing it all the way back, you realize there must be an uncreated, uncaused first cause which created the heavens and the earth. And so he came to, logically, philosophically, he came to the conclusion there must be a God. God must exist, and there must be only one God. And that's the first cause. And so Abraham then was like a philosopher, in pursuit of understanding, in pursuit of truth, and he came to a very firm commitment that God is real, and he started worshipping the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. Now, I'm sure he wasn't the first person to come to that conclusion. But, anyway, as I said, his father was an idol maker, so Abraham was a very good boy. So one day, his father said, I've got to go off to the palace to show Nimrod my new statues, the new models I've made of him, and so to get his approval. And so Nimrod said, look, Abraham, I have to go to the palace tomorrow, but tomorrow is also the market day, so I can't go to the market. So can you take the idols, the gods, to the marketplace and sell them? And Abraham said, yeah, sure, of course, God. Of course, Dad. And so the next morning, Abraham woke up, he got out the van, he loaded up the idols into the van with the tables and chair, and he drove off down to the marketplace in Ur, and set out his stall in the marketplace. And he put out all the idols on the table, and all the price tags, and he waited for the customers to come along. Anyway, after a while, an old lady came along, and she said to Abraham, Abraham, I want to buy one of your gods. And Abraham said, well, why do you want to buy one? What happened to the ones you had before? Oh, she said, some burglars broke into my house last week and they stole them. So Abraham said, well, they weren't very powerful then, were they? And the old lady said, no. But you're such a handsome young man. I'm sure your gods are more powerful, so that's why I want to buy one. And Abraham, as I said, wasn't very polite. He said, look, old woman, how old are you? And she said, I'm 85 years old. And Abraham said, look, my dad made these last month in his workshop. He carved these ones out of wood and these ones he chiseled out of stone. Why would you, an 85-year-old woman, want to bow down and worship a 1-month-old idol? They should be bowing down to worship you because you're older. And she said, you're right, Abraham. So who do you worship, Abraham? And Abraham said, I worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. And so she became his first disciple, and she started worshipping God as well. Anyway, that's how the day went. At the end of the day, Abraham loaded everything up, went home, rang the doorbell, and his dad came to the door. Terah said, right, did you sell out, Abraham? How did you get on? How was the fundraising today? And Abraham said, I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't sell a single idol. And Terah said, well, what happened? Was there somebody there selling cheaper idols? No, said Abraham. This old woman came along to buy one, and this is what I said to her. And then there's another person came, and another person. And Terah thought, oh God, what a stupid son I've got. You're a lousy salesman. No wonder nobody bought anything from you if you go and tell them that. Next month I'm going to the market and you can stay at home. The next month came round and Terah said, right Abraham, tomorrow I'm going to the market. I want you to stay at home and look after all the gods in the temple. Take care of them. And Abraham said, sure Dad, no problem. So after Terah left home, Abraham went into the temple to see the gods. And he went up to the largest god, the largest idol, and said to him, look, if you give me a message, I'll go all over the world and tell the world what you want to say. I'll be your prophet, I'll be your messenger. Just tell me what it is you want me to say. And the idol said, nothing. So Abraham said, well, maybe you're hungry. And so he went out into the kitchen and made a meal and brought it and gave it to the largest idol and said, right, eat up and then we can talk. And the idol didn't do anything. So Abraham said, well, maybe you just want to eat in private then. So I'll come back in an hour. So an hour later, Abraham came back and the food was untouched. So Abraham went up to the biggest idol and said, you have no power, you have no speech, you have no message, you're not a god. You cannot say anything or speak. You're just stone, and all the rest of you just made of wood. And then he went into his father's workshop and he got a sledgehammer and he went around and he smashed all the small idols. And it was caught on CCTV camera, as you can see. There's the evidence. Photo never lies. And then he went and he put the sledgehammer in the hands of the largest idol and he went out. Anyway, at the end of the day, Terah came home. He'd sold out, had a great day. He came in to offer all his fundraising results to the gods. But he went into the temple, opened the door, and he saw just destruction and smashed idols. And he called Abraham and said, Abraham, what happened? Did some vandals break in and smash the gods? I told you to stay and look after them. And Abraham said, look Dad, I did exactly what you said. After you went off to the market, I went in and I just talked to the biggest idols, to talk to the gods. Somebody wanted to come into the door there, I'm afraid. Do you mind letting them in?
I get it.
Got a nice smile on their face, it is open, that kind of thing. And anyway, so he said, yes, I went in just to chat to the gods, and the biggest one said he was hungry. That you went to the market without giving him any breakfast. So I went into the kitchen and made him a nice breakfast, and I gave it to him, and I left him to eat in peace. But then the little idols, they all said to him, you should share your bacon and egg and sausage with us. And the big idol didn't want to share his food. He's such a greedy, selfish god, But what he did do is he got up and he went into your workshop, he got your sledgehammer and he went and beat them all up. That's what a nasty god he is. And look, there's the evidence. He's still holding the sledgehammer in his hands. And Nimrod said to Abraham, what are you talking about? They're just made of stone and wood. They've got no power. They can't get up and walk around or speak or anything. Exactly, said Abraham. So why do you worship them? And Terah was really shocked. He said, I've got to go and take you to see Nimrod. Nimrod needs to hear about this. He's the God that we worship. And so Terah took Abraham to see Nimrod in the palace. And Terah bowed down in front of Nimrod, who was the god of the city and the empire. And Abraham just looked at him. And Nimrod said, why don't you bow down and worship me? I am your God. I am your emperor. And Abraham said, I only bow down and worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. And Nimrod said, if you don't bow down and worship me, I'll have you killed and thrown into the fiery furnace. And Abraham said, I don't fear you. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of dying. To me, God is more real than you are. God is more real to me than this palace. God is more real to me than anything. I know that if you put me to death, I'll be with God in the next world. And Nimrod was furious. And he had Abraham thrown into a fiery furnace. and angels came along and stopped him from dying, and everything turned out well, and he came out unscathed. And so at this point, Terah thought, well, maybe it's not a very friendly place to live here. And then Terah took Abraham and his family, and they packed their bags, and they moved on to live in Haran. Is that a nice story?
Yeah.
Is it from the Talmud?
From the Talmud and also in the Quran. A little retelling by me, updated it. So Abraham was the kind of person who would have, in the Soviet Union, he was the kind of person who would have been a dissident. He was the kind of person with a total commitment to the truth, who would not live the lie that you had to live if you're living in a communist society, but would just live according to what he knew was true and would be a dissident, and would have been arrested and thrown into a labour camp and would have perished there. That was the kind of person he was. Someone totally committed to the truth. Very, very brave person. Okay. So Abraham then and his family set off for Haran. There's another story here about as they go off to Haran. It says, this is again from the Talmud, and it talks about how the faith came into existence. So a man was traveling from place to place. So this man is Abraham. A man was traveling from place to place when he saw a palace in flames. He wondered, is it possible the palace has no owner? And the owner of the palace looked out and said, I'm the owner of the palace. So Abraham, our father, said, is it possible that the world lacks a ruler? God looked out and said to him, I am the ruler, the sovereign of the universe. So this, in a sense, is the beginning of the biblical faith. So Abraham's bewildered. He's very bewildered. He can, he looks at the world in which he lives, the beauty of the flowers and the trees and the mountains and the rivers and the fish and the stars, everything, and he's overwhelmed by the brilliance and the beauty of the world in which he's living, of the universe. It's incredibly beautiful, like the palace. But the palace is in flames. So also when he looks at the world, he sees the world is full of bloodshed, injustice, strife, oppression, thugs, abusers, rapists, kidnappers, are demolishing this incredibly beautiful palace, turning the world into an ugly, tragic battlefield of untold pain and horror. So Abraham wonders, what happened to the owner of the palace? What happened to the creator of this incredibly beautiful universe? Why does God allow man to destroy the world? Why does God allow such a beautiful palace to go up in flames? So this is the sort of question. And so this story then means that when Abraham looks at the world, he sees the world has order, therefore it has a creator, but the palace is full of flames, which means the world is full of disorder, full of evil, injustice and violence. So nobody builds a building and then goes away and deserts it. Therefore, if there's a fire, there must be somebody in charge to put it out. So the building must have an owner. Where is he? That's Abraham's question. Where is God? So this is a question that Abraham starts off with. The world is incredibly beautiful, but there's evil. And this is his point. Why? Why is this? Why is this evil? Where is God? Why does God allow human beings to destroy the palace? And so basically you could say that when everyone is confronted with this reality. And you could say there are three ways to look at the world. You can look at the world, you can say, well, look at the world, there's evil, but there is no God. This is one of the main reasons why people reject the existence of God. They say, if God really existed, then he wouldn't allow evil. If God really existed, he wouldn't allow people to suffer. But sometimes people reject and belief in God, they become atheists because of evil and suffering in the world. That's one way of responding to this kind of reality, to say there is no God. There's evil and therefore there is no God. Another response is to say there is God and evil is an illusion. Yeah? So how does that work? You know, some people would say, well, everything is part of the plan, it's part of God's plan. Everything happens for a reason. We may not understand the reason why it happens, but it's all part of God's plan. Yes? And, you know, if you could stand back and see the big picture, you might think, you know, if you're standing very close to a painting and you look at a little black mark, you think, well, that's, you know, that little black mark shouldn't be there. But if you stand right back, you see the whole painting, you can see that little black mark as a purpose. So that's another way in which people deal with evil. They say, really, there isn't any evil, it's just an illusion. In other words, you're just seeing things from your own point of view. If you could see things from God's point of view, actually you'd realize there is no evil. Yeah? So you shouldn't be so critical. Yes? And this is the way some social systems work. Yes? Everything is the way it's supposed to be. So don't be so critical. Just accept it. Yes? You know what I mean? This is all God's plan. God wants it to be like this. Or the founder of a particular religion set it up to be like this, therefore it's supposed to be like this. Or you should look at it from God's point of view, not your own point of view, in which case you would see that everything is hunky-dory. That make sense?
Who believes in that?
No, more than you would think.
Is it Jadism?
Sorry?
Jadism?
A lot of people in our spiritual community believe in that. You go around asking some questions and making a few critical comments, and then you find out.
Everything isn't hunky-dory.
No, but a lot of people that refuse, that live in denial, and they say you're just looking at it from your own point of view. And if you could see it from God's point of view or Father's point of view, then you'd understand it, that actually what's happening is the way is right and the way it's supposed to be.
But how can you say evil is an illusion?
Well, in that sense, it's an illusion. You think it's evil, but it's not really evil, it's good.
Or it has to happen.
Well, it has to happen, it's all predetermined, it's all predestined in that kind of sense.
It's one of the most efficient lies of the evil. Is saying that the evil doesn't exist, therefore you won't fight it.
That's right. And, you know, sort of, there are these senses. I mean, Augustine, for example, said evil is just the absence of good. I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
So I said these are different ways in which people respond. You know, sometimes they're just in denial, and sometimes they're not. So Abraham, though, was different. He said he knew from his thinking, he knew God is real. He knew God was a reality, but he also knew there was evil in the world. So how could he reconcile these two? He couldn't deny God was real and reality, but also he couldn't deny there was evil and suffering in the world. And so he had to try and make sense of this. And so Abraham asked God, "Where are you?" And God replies, "I am here. Where are you?" Man asked God, "Why did you abandon the world?" And God asked man, "Why did you abandon me?" And so sometimes people say things like, "Well, where was God in the Holocaust? Why did God allow the Holocaust to take place?" Yes? But that's not the right question. The right question is, why did human beings allow that to take place? It wasn't God that caused it. God can't stop it. Why didn't the human beings that were the next door neighbours of the Jewish people got carted off? Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't all the prison guards, SS guards, refuse to cooperate? Why didn't established churches speak out against it and denounce it? It's not why didn't God intervene, but why didn't human beings who have got bodies intervene and stop these kind of terrible things from taking place? So that's the sort of idea. And the other idea is, you know, we think something's evil. To do the second question, you know, sometimes you think evil is because you don't really understand. Sometimes you get this sort of people say when people suffer, they may think they're being punished because they did wrong, or if they're innocent, it's to purge them, to purify them, to teach them sympathy or compassion or serenity. In other words, you know, if you're going through suffering, you're supposed to be going through suffering, either because of some sin you committed, or some sin your ancestors committed, or to purify you, to make you a better person. This kind of idea. You know, that whatever happens is supposed to be happening. This kind of idea. Sort of is, like I said, you end up with a sort of predestinarian view of the world. The way things are is the way things are supposed to be. It couldn't be different than it is. Anyway, it's a Terah's family. They move and they go to Haran. So it's a very interesting family, a very complicated family. So we'll just have a look at them because lots of the people are going to be cropping up. So Terah then, he has three sons, Haran, Nahor and Abram. And Haran has he has a son called Lot and a daughter called Milcah. And Haran dies, and so Abraham takes Lot off to Canaan with him. And then Lot has two daughters, and they become the ancestors of the Moabites and the Ammonites. And then the second son, Nahor, he marries Haran's daughter, Milcah. They have a son called Bethuel. Bethuel then has a son called Laban, who has two daughters, Leah and Rachel, who end up marrying Jacob. And then Bethuel has a daughter called Rebekah, who ends up marrying Isaac. And then he has a third son called Abraham. So Abraham marries Sarah, who is his half-sister. So Sarah is the daughter of Terah, but from a different mother. So Terah then has more than one wife. Don't know why, particularly doesn't say anything. So Abraham then marries his half-sister, and they have a son called Isaac. Isaac marries his cousin Rebekah, and has two sons, Jacob, who marries his cousins Leah and Rachel, and Esau, who marries Ishmael, one of Ishmael's daughters, and is the ancestor of the Edomites. And Jacob then is the ancestor of the Israelites. And then Abraham also has a relationship with concubine Hagar, through whom he has a son Ishmael, who becomes the Ishmaelites and the Arab people. So you can see it's a very interesting and very, very complicated family. It's much more complicated than any soap opera you see on television. Really. Any questions about that? Interesting, isn't it? A little intermarriage.
So you said Jacob and Rebecca are cousins? You said Jacob, sorry, Isaac and Rebecca are like cousins, eh?
Yeah, Isaac and Rebecca are cousins, Jacob and Leah are cousins. They're not first cousins, they're
Second cousin.
second cousins, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so Isaac and Bethel are first cousins.
Isaac and Bethel, yeah, first cousins.
Yeah.
Because it drops a generation there, yeah. Because it takes a long, long time for Abraham and Sarah to have a son, whereas Nahor has a son much earlier. And so that's why Isaac marries his first cousin's daughter. Yeah.
Actually, William, in those days, did they have any sort of idea that it was right or wrong to marry their sister or brother or something? Or did they just do it anyway?
Well, I mean, that's what happens. That's the way it is in the Bible. Certainly later, yes, it is. In the Bible, it's what you're not allowed to marry first cousins. From the time of Moses and the Mosaic law, you're not allowed to marry your mother, your daughter, or your niece, or your nephew, or your... Yes, those things are very strictly prohibited from the time of Moses. But,
Before that, they just did it, didn't they? They just did it.
I don't know. I don't know how common it was. For example, in Egypt, it was normal for brothers and sisters to marry each other. Pharaoh married his sister. That kind of stuff was quite common, yeah. And so it's only from the time of Moses you get these very, very strict laws about all these things, which are really quite unique from what I understand in the ancient world. This kind of prohibitions of, about who you're allowed, not allowed to marry. Okay, what's Abraham's place in God's providence? So this is a verse which you find in the Divine Principle. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. So this is the beginning of this idea of time as a journey, going on a destination, this idea of the spiritual life being a journey from one place to another. So time then becomes a narrative, has a beginning, a middle and an end. So this revolutionary concept of time is born in Judaism. So linear time having a beginning, a middle and an end, going in a certain direction, the Jewish idea, biblical idea. So the ancient world, they had an idea of cyclical time. Time is repetitive. In other words, there's no progress. And so if you have the idea of time as being repetitive and no progress, it means society just is very, very conservative. Everything just remains the way that it is. But if you think time is linear, it means you can have the idea of progress and things can change and improve. So it's a very important idea, the idea of linear time. Came from the Bible. And also this is, a rejection of determinism. So Karl Marx, for example, some of you study, said that human beings are determined by the play of economic forces, by class differences, by who owns land. And so God said to Abraham, leave the land. Yes, leave the land. Go somewhere else, so you're not determined by your economic background. And another great philosopher, Spinoza, he said all human beings are determined by the circumstances of their birth. What now we'd call genetic instincts. So God said to Abraham, leave the place of your birth. Yeah? In other words, you're not going to be determined by the place where you're born. You can actually move and you can change and create a new life, a new world, a new future. And Sigmund Freud said, human beings are determined by our early childhood experiences. So God said to Abraham, leave your father's house. So what God is doing here is telling Abraham to leave behind all the things that determined his future. So sometimes people think, well, we have no choice, that our past determines our future. But through Abraham, God calling Abraham, he's saying, well, that is your past, but actually the future is open. The future is open. No matter what happened in the past, you can make choices and decisions today that can create a new future. The past doesn't determine you. Your background doesn't determine you. Your family doesn't determine you. Your place within society doesn't determine you. All these things, you're not determined by these things. Yes, but actually the future is open. So again, this is a very new idea in the ancient world, this idea that the future is open. And I'll make of you a great nation, and I'll bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So this is God's calling to Abraham 4,000 years ago, that through Abraham all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So that's his origin of this idea of God's blessing coming through Abraham, and his name will become great. So Abraham then, that's where he left, that little place down the bottom right-hand corner there, and he set off up to Haran, and then went down from there. After his father died, he went down to Canaan. Okay, that's a very interesting story. So when they arrived in Canaan, it says there's a famine in the land, so Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there. So he heard there's a famine in Canaan, struck the land, so he went down into Egypt as an immigrant to live in Egypt. And before he arrived in Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, I know you're a good-looking woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they'll kill me, but they'll let you live. So tell them you're my sister, so they'll treat me well for your sake, and I'll survive because of you. Then when Abraham entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how beautiful his wife was. You can see there in the top picture, he's arriving at the immigration authorities there, showing his passport, and they say, wow, what an incredible person, incredibly beautiful person she is. And so the rumor went to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was told that an incredibly beautiful woman has arrived. And so when the Pharaoh's princes saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's household. So the Pharaoh then invited Abraham and Sarah around for tea in the palace, and Pharaoh was so taken by Abraham and Sarah, he invited them to stay for dinner. And then after dinner, Pharaoh said to Abraham, look, why don't you go and stay at the bed and breakfast down the road, And Sarah, I'd like you to stay overnight. And so Sarah then ended up staying the night and living in the palace. And so she had an incredibly beautiful bedroom, with an incredibly comfortable bed, with a wardrobe full of silk clothes and as many pairs of shoes as she wanted. When she woke up in the morning, she had a nice hot bath and a sauna, and somebody came and painted her fingernails and her toenails, and she got massaged, and someone came and did her hair, and, and her eyebrows and everything. And she was living in luxury. And one night, this day after day, as much food and beautiful fruits and everything she wanted. Anyway, so one night, there was a knock on the door, in her bedroom door, and the Pharaoh came in. And the Pharaoh sat down next to Sarah and started chatting her up and saying, "You're so beautiful, you're much more beautiful than all the other wives I've got. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I would like to marry you, and I would like you to make you the Queen of Egypt. I'd like to make you the wife of the most powerful man in the world." And so what's Sarah's choice here?
We can either go for Pharaoh's option,
Yeah?
or deny Pharaoh's option.
Yeah.
Stick with Abraham.
Right, so she had to choose. She had to make a choice between getting married to Pharaoh and becoming the wife of the most powerful man in the world, living a life of absolute luxury as the most wife, as Pharaoh's queen, or remaining faithful to Abraham, this prophet of God, living in a tent, traveling around the place. Okay? So God wasn't going to intervene, but God did send an angel to protect Sarah. And the story goes that the angel wouldn't intervene without Sarah's say-so. And so after a while, this chatting up, and the Pharaoh put out his hand to stroke Sarah's beautiful hair, and Sarah said to the angel, "Give him a slap." So, boom. The Pharaoh got a big slap, and he looked around the room. Who's in this room with me? Who else is in here? Nobody. And he sat down again and started to talk to her again. Again, when he put his hand up to stroke her hair, again she said to the angel, "Give him a slap." And so this went on all through the night. And so, when dawn started to come up, the Pharaoh's feeling all battered and bruised. He thought, "Well, I'm going to my bed now." And so he went out of the bedroom, got into his own bed, and fell asleep. And when he fell asleep, he had a dream. And God said to Pharaoh in his dream, "Sarah is the wife of Abraham, who is my prophet." And the Pharaoh woke up with a start, and he called Abraham, invited him round for breakfast, and he said, "Abraham, you should have told me. I didn't realise that she was your wife, and you're the prophet of God." So the Pharaoh then, he gave Sarah back to Abraham, along with Hagar, who was his daughter, to be Sarah's maid, and also gave him lots of wealth. So you might wonder, what's going on here? Well, the story before, Lucifer, who seemed to be very, very powerful and very, very sophisticated, he seduced Eve. So Eve then, she had to make a choice. Was she going to give in to Lucifer's temptation, or was she going to remain faithful to Adam? So from Eve's point of view, Lucifer appeared to be much greater, much more sophisticated, much wiser, much more knowledgeable than Adam. Yeah? So she gave in to that temptation and formed that relationship with Satan. And so restoration then is human beings finding themselves in the same sort of position as Lucifer or Eve or Adam, and going through the similar kind of situation, facing the same kind of temptation. And this time, instead of giving in to the temptation, doing the wrong thing, actually overcoming the temptation and doing the right thing. And so Sarah here, she's put in the same situation, Eve, and she has a choice. She either gives into the temptation to marry Pharaoh, or maintains her purity, overcomes that temptation, and remains faithful to Abraham. So the greatness of Sarah then is she restored the failure of Eve. She restored the mistake that Eve made. And so through doing that, she overcame her own fallen nature. And so through that, she separated from Satan, and so she purified herself. So through purifying herself, it meant that when she had a child, her children would be born with less fallen nature than she was. So this is the way that the blood lineage is changed incrementally. Incrementally over one person after another, finding themselves in these kind of situations, overcoming that fallen nature and purifying themselves, that the lineage then becomes purified. That makes sense? And so in that lineage then you have to find people restoring the same position, Lucifer's position, Eve's position and Adam's position, over and over again. That happens to purify the lineage for Jesus. Okay? So that's restoration. So have a look at Abraham's life of faith. So another one of the things that Abraham got involved with was the Battle of the Five Kings. And so there was these 4 kings, they got involved with a battle against 5 kings and this enemy won. And they also took with them Lot, because Lot happened to be living in Sodom, and they took Sodom, who was Abraham's nephew, and they went away. So when Abraham then heard that Lot had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, all in his house, 318 of them, and they went in pursuit of these kings. And they fought against these kings and defeated them. Okay? So here you've got this interesting, that when Abraham had already separated from Lot at this stage, Abraham was, in the hills and Lot was down in the valley. They hadn't got on very well with each other. But even when Abraham heard that his nephew had been captured, he didn't think, oh well, that's a shame, he should have stuck with me. He felt responsible for his nephew's well-being. And so he took the men who were living with him, and he went to fight against these other armies, these other kings, and to be able to save his nephew Lot. So it said in the Bible he had 318 people, 318 men living in his household. So these were his disciples, and the children of his disciples. And then after that, after they won this battle, and it says Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. So Melchizedek is the king of Salem, so this Salem is Jerusalem. So even from those days, Jerusalem was a place for the worship of God. Salem, of course, means peace, shalom. So Melchizedek was the king of that place, which is now that mountaintop settlement, which is now called Jerusalem. He brought out bread and wine. So again, it's very symbolic. He's a priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. So Abraham then here is instituting the practice of tithing. So Abraham gave a tenth of all his spoils to Melchizedek. And so this then became Abraham's life of faith. This is foundation of faith, which you looked at before. The central figure of Abraham, the conditional object, was his tithing. And that's what he did. He regularly made offerings and gifts to, that was his foundation of faith, where he restored his foundation of faith, his life of faith. So look a little bit more, his faith in God. So not long after this, God said to Abraham, "Look towards heaven and number the stars if you're able to number them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Doesn't this kind of shocking? How many stars are there?
Quite a lot.
Yeah, this is Abraham counting. 1,232,524. 1,232,500, and oh no, I've lost count. I've got to start all over again. 1, 2, 3. Okay. The reality is, we know there are a countless number of stars. Nobody knows. There are billions. When it's completely dark, you can't see it from London. When you go to a place where there's total darkness, you look at the skies. There's just it's numberless. You can't count the number of stars around in the sky. So you can see here, Abraham, though, he had no son, he had no children, but Abraham believed God. So what was the basis of that? Well, Abraham's faith was based upon reason and experience. Abraham knew God as a reality. He knew from his proof. He knew God existed. He knew from his personal experience that God was real. He knew he could have a personal relationship with God. He knew God loved him and cared about him. He knew God was trustworthy and good. And so he knew that if God said this, it would come true. And so that's why he believed in God, and God counted to him his righteousness. So that was his faith in God. His faith in God is based upon reason and evidence, as opposed to emotion and imagination. Okay, then next, God said to him, look towards heaven and number the stars. And the next God said, the next verse, God said, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur, the Chaldeans, to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? But what do you think of that? As a response. Has he responded the same way as he did in the previous verse, or differently? He's responded differently, hasn't he? Instead of believing God, he said, but how am I to know I am to possess it? So it's a question. So what do you think about that?
He doesn't believe God.
Well, he
It's
wants
like, how can I be sure what you're saying is true?
That's what he wants, evidence, doesn't he? So what do you think about that? Do you think it's right to ask questions or to question or to ask for evidence?
It's good. I think it's good.
It's good? Yeah. I mean, all I can say is that's what he did. I mean, he's not the only person, the first person in the Bible that's done that. If you remember the story of Gideon and the Midianites, and God tells Gideon in a dream, you have to lead the people, you have to gather an army to go and defeat the Midianites. Gideon wakes up in the morning and thinks that was just a dream. And he says, okay, maybe it was true, but in order for it to be true, he says to God, you have to show me, give me some evidence. So I'm going to put out a wool fleece outside my door tonight, and in the morning I want the wool fleece to be completely soaking wet and all the ground to be dry. Then I'll realise it wasn't just a dream. And so he does that the next morning. The wool fleece is completely wet and the ground is completely dry. And then Gideon said, well, let's try it the other way around, and then I'll definitely believe you. So I've got this soaking wet wool fleece. In the morning I want it to be completely dry and the ground to be completely wet. So the next morning the fleece is completely dry, the ground is completely wet, and Gideon swallows hard and thinks, okay, I better go and raise the army. Okay? So that's the way it works. So anyway, all I can say, this is what Abraham did. His response was different. It's difficult to judge him or to say, well, he shouldn't have asked questions, but anyway, he did. He asked a question. There's some kind of, you could say his faith wavered or something. Maybe he looked at the world, maybe he looked around and thought, whoa, look at all these people living here in these cities. I can't imagine that happening. I don't know. Anyway, so then he had to restore the foundation of faith. He already was living a life of faith, but now he had to make an offering to restore the foundation of faith. And so, up until this time, Abraham's in position unformed Adam, and he had to restore the foundation of faith. And so God asked him, because in this, he had to restore not just himself, he had to restore the three generations, Adam, Noah, and himself. And so this offering then was made up of a dove and a pigeon, formation stage, ram and a goat, the growth stage, and a heifer representing the completion stage. Now there are lots of different ways in which one can interpret this. Just lots of different ways. And so he had to try and, to indemnify vertically, horizontally, all the vertical conditions which had been invaded by Satan through these three generations of Adam, Noah, and Abraham. And so let's see what happened. And Abraham brought God all of these. He cut them in half and laid each half over against the other. but he did not cut the birds in half. So this idea of cutting the sacrifice in half, this is just normal things that were done in the ancient world, where people made a contract, an agreement. You know, they'd have a discussion about a deal, a business deal. They come to an agreement, and then sit down, and the way they seal the agreement was by cutting an animal in half and then cooking it, and this is the way they do it. Sometimes in modern world, sometimes people would have a contract, and they cut the contract in half, like that, the wavy lines, and each would keep one half of the contract, and you could prove it, was the same piece of paper because you could join them up, and the wavy lines meet exactly. So you couldn't go and rewrite the contract and claim this is, the real one. Anyway, so this is the way contracts and agreements were settled in the ancient world, through cutting animals in half. So Abraham, he cut them in half, but he did not cut the birds in half. When birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abraham, and behold, dreadful great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and there will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years." So you might wonder, what's it to do with the land? So if you remember, the question was, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Ur to give you this land to possess." To give you and your descendants this land to possess. Okay, so you had this question. Now, if he'd made the offering successfully, then he and his descendants would have lived in Canaan for 400 years. Okay? But because he didn't, then it meant that his descendants then were going to be out of Canaan, living in a foreign land for 400 years. So why was this a mistake? You could say it's not dividing Cain and Abel. You could say it's a repeat of the failure of Noah's time to divide good and evil from evil, and also couldn't separate out realm of God's sovereignty, blood of death not drained. These sort of theological explanations for why it was a mistake. But basically, it didn't separate the offering correctly, which is what was normal in the ancient world. The thing is, why the heavy punishment? What do you think about that? Do you think that was fair? Do you think it was a bit harsh? Not cutting 2 birds up and your descendants suffer for 400 years for slavery? That would be harsh.
Yeah, it's pretty unfair. Especially for the descendants.
Yeah,
who had no choice in the matter.
Yeah, it's not their mistake, it's not their fault. That's just the way the world works. Isn't it? Okay, so this is all about the land, wasn't it? Now, Abraham then here is restoring the foundation of faith. So it's about the land. And so if Abraham had made the offering successfully, then it means that his descendants would have restored the foundation of faith, which means that his descendants would have lived in Canaan for 400 years. They would have lived in Canaan, and over that 400 years they would have prospered, and at the end of that 400 years there would be a nation. And there'd be a foundation there for God to be able to send the Messiah. Yes? God couldn't send the Messiah at Abraham's time because the foundation was too small. Satan's sovereignty already had, Egypt and empires and things. But after 400 years of living and prospering in Canaan, then Abraham's descendants would have formed a nation and a foundation to receive the Messiah. So this is kind of like the deal between God and Satan. When you make a condition, an offering, we talked about this before, you make an offering, a foundation of restoring the foundation of faith, it's about determining ownership. Yes? And so God and Satan both want to claim that condition. So if Abraham had done it successfully, then God could have claimed that condition, and there would have been 400 years of blessing. But then because he didn't make it successfully, made a mistake, then Satan could give an equivalent amount of cursing. So it's like a contract which is drawn up between God and Satan. God says to Satan, look, if Abraham restores the foundation of faith, then I can give him and his descendants 400 years of blessing. Satan says, okay, but if he makes a mistake, then I can give him and his descendants 400 years of suffering. Yes, that's just the way it works in that sense. It's like, so this condition then is a condition of lesser indemnity. So if Abraham would offer this condition of lesser indemnity successfully, it would have meant a lot of grace and blessing. But because he didn't do that, it became a condition of greater indemnity, where Satan was able to invade and try and destroy Abraham's descendants and curse them. It becomes a greater indemnity. It's like a pump. Then it becomes Satan trying to break their faith and destroy their faith. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And this often happens, as I've often said, it's like being able to park your car for an hour in central London. To do that for £1, or about £3, I think it is now, is you could say it's like a grace. You don't have to buy that parking space to be able to park your car. You can actually use that parking space for an hour for £3. It's like an incredible grace. If you make that small condition, you can park the car for an hour. But if you overstay, then how much do you pay? £60 for an extra 10 minutes. Yeah, it's like the punishment. You know what I mean? So that's the same. Contracts, they have terms and conditions. You keep the conditions, then everything works out well. You break the conditions, and you get punished or fined or something. It's just the way it works. And in terms of, you think, well, it's not Abraham's descendants' fault. But, the reality is, there are people who make decisions, and their descendants suffer for those decisions. I remember when I was living in Russia, there was, I got to know this very old lady. She was about 80 years old then, she's died now. And she was an American, living in Russia. You might wonder, what was she doing there? Well, her parents were Americans, and during the time of the revolution, the Russian Revolution, they were very idealistic communists. And so they moved from America, land of the free, they moved to Russia as idealists to try and build a socialist utopia. Anyway, things didn't work out very well for them. And this lady, who I knew, called Lillian, she got married to, she met a British man during the time of Stalin. Anyway, he was accused of being a spy and was kicked out, and she was sent off into Siberia. And, she was actually a brilliant pianist. She went to the Moscow Conservatory. But because of this situation of her husband being accused of being a spy during Stalin's time, and being kicked out of the Soviet Union, and her going into exile in Siberia, she went, after Stalin died, she was able to go back, but she's never able to get proper employment. She's never able to play the piano. The only thing she was allowed to do was to be a primary school teacher, which she loved doing. But she had the potential to do something far more than that. Yes. So, she was a very talented, person, but because of that. And then she wasn't able to go back to America, because she wasn't able to go to the American embassy. So it wasn't until the fall of the Berlin Wall and Perestroika that it then became possible for her to go to the American embassy and say, I'm an American, and to get an American birth certificate from America, and then to get an American passport. Then finally, when she's 85 years old, to go back to America, to go home. Yeah. So that was a decision her parents made. But that led to consequences for the descendants, and that's just the way it works. Abraham did this, but then, and so it's the same with, all human beings, our ancestors make certain decisions, which is why we're here as opposed to somewhere else. Just the way it works. Okay. So, shall we stop there? After this, it gets talking about Sarah and Hagar. Maybe we'll just carry on. Let's just finish this part here. Okay, so Sarah now was 76 years old. She's well past going to the chemist to get supplies every month. And so Abraham and Sarah then were always talking about, how can, we have any descendants? God said our descendants will number the stars of heaven, but we don't have any children. Sarah said, I can't have children anymore. And so Sarah thought, well, okay, I have a maid. So she said to Abraham, look, why don't you sleep with my maid? If you sleep with my maid, then we can have a son through my maid. So the way it was in those days, if you owned a slave and the slave had a child, that child belonged to the slave owner. And so Hagar then was acting like a surrogate mother, having a child on behalf of Sarah. So Abraham slept with Hagar, and then Hagar became pregnant. So it wasn't that Abraham fell. He didn't think, well, I can't have a child with Sarah, so I'm going to go and sleep with her pretty young maid. It was actually Sarah who took the initiative and offered, Hagar to Abraham. There wasn't like a sort of forced situation. Anyway, so Hagar then became pregnant, and when she became pregnant, she had a lot of contempt for Sarah. She looked down on Sarah and thought, I'm able to give Abraham a son, you're not able to give Abraham a son, I'm much better than you are. And so she started to think in her mind, I can replace you as Abraham's favourite wife, and then you can be my servant. So that's the way she started thinking. Treated Sarah with a lot of contempt. Very, very difficult situation, this relationship between two women fighting over the love of one man, basically. And so Sarah then was really hurt that Hagar started to treat her in this way. And so Sarah started to treat Hagar very harshly. And Hagar ran away, and she ran into the desert. And when she was in the desert, then the angel appeared to her and said to Hagar, look, you're going to have a son, you're going to name him Ishmael, and lots of good things are going to happen, come from him. And what exactly does? Anyway, so...
Louis, William,
Yeah?
which one is the truth? You said Hagar runs away, and then I also heard too that it was Sarah that encouraged Abraham to kick her out,
But that was later.
Oh,
That was after Ishmael was born, and after Isaac was born.
Oh, I see.
So this is while Hagar was pregnant.
Oh, I see.
And so, as I said, you get this sort of situation, you've got two women fighting over the love of a man. And so it's like, when you get that kind of situation, you get all kinds of jealousies. The jealousies between women can be incredibly intense. Really intense. And,
That's a lot of experience.
you can see this. You can see it in schools, girls are much more likely to use verbal, psychological tools such as name calling, isolation, excluding, all kinds of relational aggression. And when girls' relationships go wrong, they do so in very spectacular fashion. Often without an easy fix, it becomes really intense. Now, it's a typical female tactics of spreading gossip, rumours, backstabbing, damaging reputations, giving dirty looks, etc., etc. So that's what was going on here. It's much more complicated than a relationship between boys. Anyway, so Hagar had a son called Ishmael. And then 13 years later, when Ishmael was 13 years old, God spoke to Abraham and said, I'll bless Sarah and I'll give you a son by her, and she shall be the mother of nations, kings of people shall come from her. So at this stage then, Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 90 years old. And then Sarah gives birth to Isaac. And then one day Sarah sees Ishmael playing with Isaac, and it looks to Sarah as if Ishmael is mistreating Isaac. And Sarah said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be the heir with my son Isaac. So Sarah then was very worried that Ishmael might kill Isaac and take all the inheritance for himself. Because he realized, Abraham and Sarah are really old, they might die, in which case Hagar and Ishmael, who are much younger, might take all the inheritance. And so Abraham's not pleased with this. He argues with God about this, because he doesn't want to do this. And then God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy or slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned. So God tells Abraham to listen to his wife, which is always good advice. And so Abraham then sent Hagar and Ishmael away. And God said to Abraham, I'll bless Ishmael and make him fruitful, and he shall be the father of 12 princes, and I'll make him a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac. So the Bible says then that God's blessing will also come to Ishmael and his descendants. I have 12 princes, and from that line come the Arab people and Muhammad. So restoring the foundation of substance, which should have happened between Isaac and Ishmael, wasn't done. Isaac in the position of Abel, Ishmael in the position of Cain, should have made a foundation of substance, but it wasn't possible. If the general understanding is, if Abraham had restored the foundation of faith with the offerings, then it would have been possible for Isaac and Ishmael to restore the foundation of substance. There might have been some spiritual protection, some spiritual possibility for that to happen. But because they didn't restore the foundation of faith, the understanding is it wasn't a spiritual foundation there which would have enabled Isaac and Ishmael to have made the foundation of substance. And so they were sent away. So there's an unresolved issue going on until today between Jews and Arabs. And then Hagar and Ishmael, they go off into the desert. And then later, after the binding of Isaac, after Sarah dies, then Abraham wonders, I wonder what happened to Hagar and Ishmael. And so Abraham gets on a camel and he goes to visit and find his son Ishmael. And he finds this tent and Ishmael's not there. His woman comes out and he said, where's Ishmael? And she said, he's not here. And Abraham goes away. And anyway, Abraham comes back a bit later and finds Ishmael. He's got a new wife by this stage. He's much more polite. Invites him in for tea and coffee. And then it says that in the Quran it says that later Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba, the first house for the worship of God. That's in the center of Mecca. It says in the Quran that Abraham raised the foundation of the shrine. Together with Ishmael they prayed, our Lord, accept this from us. You are the hero, the omniscient. Okay, so yeah, this. So when you read the Quran, it's like little bits of the story which you don't find in the Bible. What happened to Ishmael and Hagar? Well, that's what happened. And there's also a general understanding that after Sarah died, then Abraham remarried. The Bible says he got married to somebody called Keturah.
Keturah.
Keturah. Keturah, that's right. Thank you. Keturah is a marriage contract. Keturah had many more children. But before
6 sons.
Yeah, but before he died, then he sent them away to the east.
Yes.
And so there is this another tradition is that these sons that he sent away to the east, they were the founders of the Far Eastern religions. In India, a place like this.
Yes. I feel very strong that I think through one of these sons, Father came from my lineage actually. And this is what they established Korea's lineage, Maybe through one of the sons, I think.
It's possible.
That's it, yeah, that's it. If you go to history, I think this is where Father's name came from. So Father is actually, Prophet is a very direct descendant of Abraham, realistically, I feel.
Yeah, like half the rest of the world, yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
It's possible, yeah.
Yes.
That's as I said, it's like a sort of legend, the story that the God of the Bible is the God of all human beings. That Abraham was to bless the world, and not just people through Isaac, but also people through Ishmael, Islam, but also these other sons who went and founded the religions in the Far East. Also the way through which God was able to bring blessing to the East, the rest of the world as well. Anyway, in terms of this lady, Keturah, again, there's a tradition that actually is Hagar, that when he found Hagar, he remarried her and had more children through her. There are different traditions, different stories here, whether it's the same lady or a different lady. Alright, so we'll stop there. This next part goes on to the second chance. Any questions?